Welcome to the Expert's Journey podcast, where we're all about creating your path to impact. Join your hosts, Dixie Mary Carlton from Indie Expert Publishing and Mr. Web Marketing Brad Houck, as we look at how you can grow your business and influence by leveraging your knowledge for profit. Welcome to the Expert's Journey podcast. In this episode, Dixie and myself are going to be discussing adapting your speaking style based on your audience and venue. You're not always going to be talking to the same people or the same size crowd. Or it might not even be an auditorium. It could be a small business lunchroom. Who knows where you'll end up? So today we're going to have a look at what that means and what are some of the things that you can do to adapt yourself to fitting to the different rooms you'll end up in. So good morning, Dixie.
Good morning, Brad. How are you going today?
I'm going good.
Good.
So today's one, interesting one. I mean, I don't think I've ever talked to two same audiences ever. So every audience is different in their own way.
Yeah.
And you always need to adapt because you need to work with the room. And sometimes that can mean physical changes to the room. Other times it can mean, placement of things. There's a whole pile of elements that come into speaking.
Yeah.
Even how you run the room or you own the room when you're at the front, how you use your space. So much that takes into account the audience as well as your performance, I suppose.
I said, you're so right. You've hit the nail on the head. There are never two audiences or two presentations who'll do exactly the same. And it doesn't matter if you're speaking on the same thing all the time. It doesn't matter if you think that you are someone who's just going to do workshops all the time. Every workshop will be different. Every venue will be different. And, trying to explain that to people who have only just started to getting into the speaking industry, sometimes a bit blown away by how much there is to get your head around with regards to doing this work. How many different ways can you run the same information? Well, there's hundreds.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, the other thing is too, you don't know when you go into this, whether you'll be doing the same speech over and over, like some speakers do, or whether you never get to say the same speech twice almost, which is something I've experienced. And it's really hard work, because every audience wants a different topic based on your original topic. So even that, just the audience expectations are different before you even get to the room. And that can be extremely frustrating for a speaker because you just want to do your speech and, and then see where it leads. But, it's like, no, well, can you talk about social media this week? Not SEO. It's like, that's a whole nother speech.
Yes. And, it's different when you're thinking about, what your outcomes are going to be. What is it that you're wanting to have everybody do? How do you want to motivate and inspire the room to take action? So you've got to be thinking about that as well. And I think one of the biggest traps that we all fall into is that we think we know our stuff so well and that our stuff is obviously clearly understood by most people. So therefore we get bored with our own stuff. So how do we maintain our own enthusiasm for our own topic is sometimes a really hard thing to do. So how do you do that? Like, how do you get into a room, set up and read the room and then think, right, okay, this is, I'm going to nail it. I'm going to be so amazing. Even if it was a similar topic to what you did or a similar audience to what you did the week before. Where do you find the enthusiasm?
So for me, I just recently did a speech just a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of, going there, you drive there. In this case, it was local. So I drove there and got in the lift and got up. And as soon as I started getting in the lift, I started to get those prickles, the adrenaline started to pump. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've been doing this since 2009 and the adrenaline's going up. And then, of course, you walk into the room. And for me, obviously, I want to greet the people who I'm there to speak for. I want to go over and say, hi, I'm Brad. How are you? Chat to them for a couple of minutes and say, okay, where do you want me? Where do you see me fitting in today? What's the program that you've got if they haven't sent it to me? And kind of get a bit of background information, but also trying to establish that connection with the person you're speaking for. Because you may not have ever met them before. That I was booked by someone else in another part of the country.
It's right.
So I find that's important. And then while I'm doing that, I'm actually surveying the room at the same time. I'm like, oh, what sort of layout are they using? Because you'll never know that till you walk in, unless it's a conference and you've kind of gone there and you realize it's just like conference style or something. But if it's, say, a networking meeting, they might be on breakfast tables because they're eating breakfast, or they might be in They might be on round tables, they might be on rectangular tables, they might be in a U shape or in rows. You never know what's going on in that room.
They might even be
until you walk
standing.
through the door. Yeah. And like some speakers will say, oh, well, I get there early and I rearrange the room, but that's not possible 90% of the time in my experience. It is when you've got a certain level of control, but when you're speaking, say, at network groups, which is where many, many speakers start off, and I really enjoy those. I like meeting local business people. I find it interesting. But you kind of go in there and it's like, it's going to be something to do with food, so therefore there's going to be a certain sort of rough layout. And then the next thing I'm looking at, because I do use a couple of slides, I don't use hundreds of slides, but I use slides to prompt myself. I'm looking at the projector. I'm like, am I going to be standing in the dark in front of that bright screen? Because most rooms have atrocious lighting. They sell them as conference rooms or as rooms where, you can have a presenter, and then where the presenter stands is pitch black. So you got a bright screen, pitch black, and then lights on the tables in front of you. Like, who did the lighting in this room? Like, seriously, you sell this as a room? So, sorry to harp there.
You're right.
Like, that's the way my head goes straight away. I was like, I'm going to be standing in the dark talking. This is ridiculous. So how do I get out of the dark?
Or have a halo behind.
Can I move forward closer to the people? Do I move around the room a bit? How do I do that? And it's hard because you still need your slides. You might have, exercises or whatever on them. So at some stage, you'll probably need them. And then I'm looking at the tables and going, am I going to be able to move freely between those tables when there's people sitting there? Where can I stand to the side so that when there's an exercise on the screen, I move to the side so I'm out of view and people can talk amongst themselves and look at that without me, pacing back and forth in front of them, get out of the road, have a drink of water, whatever. So there's so much stuff goes through my head when I enter a room. Most people probably don't overthink it like I do, but this is what goes on in my mind.
Oh, I don't think that you're unusual at all in that. I've worked with so many speakers over the years, and I think the majority of us all have these mental checklists of, am I going to be standing in front of the projector? Is the projector even going to work? Is there going to be a halo light behind me? Are the people going to be, seated? Are they going to be standing? Are they going to be, engaged? Are we going to have, handouts? Are we going to use, move people around for things? How long is the event going to be? So therefore that will dictate certain things about what kind of interaction you have. How do you cope if there is a person in the room who is particularly, dare I say, annoying or wants to kind of, interject all of the time, or someone who's, not paying attention? How do you handle it if someone's sitting in the second row and they're practically falling asleep? There are so many things to learn about this industry, and the more experience we have, the more prepared we are. But it doesn't matter how many times you've done this, there is always going to be something that trips you up. And in fact, sometimes I've known people who have literally tripped up and fallen off the stage.
Oh, yeah. I've seen people fall off stage. That's always fun. Pray they don't hurt themselves for it. You get the laugh out of it, then you're like, oh, I hope they didn't break their arms.
Yeah, I've seen some of those as well. That's been interesting.
Wardrobe even, like stupid things like, do I button up my coat or do I have it unbuttoned? Do I do one button or two buttons?
Yeah.
I know there's protocols for that, but what do I feel comfortable in?
Yeah.
Is, another thing entirely.
Yeah.
Do I take my jacket off? If I'm working in a room and I'm doing a workshop thing, I might take my jacket off and roll my sleeves up as, like get into work sort of mode. And so you're doing all these things, and sometimes you're thinking about it, and other times you're not. You're just like, oh, I'm hot up here, I'm moving around a lot, I'll just take my jacket off. And I'll say to everyone, look, I'm getting a bit hot moving around this room. Does anyone object to me taking my jacket off? Like, no, of course not.
Well, of course, that doesn't work if you are menopausal. And I know many, many women who are really terrified about, how do I deal with, breaking out in a hot sweat because I'm, having these hot flushes, or I'm suddenly having these situations where I'm dressing up, I'm dressing down, I'm putting my wrap on and taking it off. I'm clearly uncomfortable, and, half the audience will at least be aware of what's going on for me. I'm not able to regulate my temperature. And when you can't regulate your temperature, your brain goes out the window as well, and you forget what you're supposed to be saying. And, distractions can be, our worst enemy, depending on how much we rely on rehearsed and pre-developed content versus speaking to the topic and just standing up there and, hey, this is what I know, so it's not a rehearsed line-by-line speech, which I know some people who do that, and I'm in awe of them, but I've never been able to do that myself. So
No, not me.
simple things can just trip you up. And I think one of the big things that we all have to do is give ourselves permission to be human. And when things go wrong, they'll go wrong. If they're going to go right, then we should congratulate ourselves as well. And making sure we've got really good positive audience interaction can also be something that helps us to find our own new levels of enthusiasm. Because if you've got someone in the room who is really going to banter with you well, or that you can get up to do an exercise with, and they can get people feeling really good, that can be amazing.
And it's hard sometimes too, because the audience doesn't always give you anything. I've stood in front of audiences where I've got deadpanned and then come off and they've gone, I wrote down so much stuff. I really, really enjoyed your speech. And I'm like, tell your face.
Yeah.
I thought you were all dead. I thought I really, I thought I blew it. So, and I'll often get that. And I suppose that's the nature of the way I deliver content.
Yeah.
But, I've seen that a few times, or many times to be honest, where I'm trying to, I'm looking at the audience and I'm not necessarily getting a lot of reaction from the audience. I can get them to do activities and, people give me answers and all that sort of stuff, but I'm not seeing this kind of really positive, like, oh, we're loving this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it's 50 million questions. Oh, that was sort of, and what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And you're like, why didn't you do this when I was on stage? I was dying up there. I'm doing my best work and you're killing me. I mean, it's just the way it is. You cannot tell, what's actually going on in the audience's minds, even when you're really close to them sometimes.
Yeah.
So, that one for me is always a killer. I suffer from it. And I think maybe some of it's just I'm face blind, but,
Well, a good trick I learned a few years ago, which I always do now, well, two good tricks. One is that if I get an opportunity, if I'm speaking after lunch or after a break, I will just sprinkle a little bit of natural essential oils through the room, just a little bit of a spray of that, a rejuvenating one, which just seems to help the energy in general in the room. So I've always used that. But and the other thing is that I always line up two people in the room to ask questions. And I'll ask them to, look, if no one else is asking questions, can you please fire this question into me and then I can answer it. And that might just break the ice for anyone else who wants to ask questions. And I find that really helpful.
Yeah, you can set up your room that way. And that makes sense too, if you know people, or even if you, like I always like to talk to people before I go on stage. I'm not stressing about going on stage. So I'll generally network just like everybody else at the meeting or whatever. And that gives me a chance to meet a couple of people who I can rely on, or I can, say to them, look, can you think up a question during the time you're watching me, and maybe, shoot that up at the end if no one else has any questions, just give me something to roll off, please. And people are only too happy to help.
Yeah.
They all understand, it's not something they want to do in most cases, unless you're speaking to a room full of speakers. Just the audience does not want to speak in public. So the fact that you can do it gets you a high level of respect, to be honest. And so you should take advantage of that to make the end and those question times more engaging for everybody. So we've got in our list of things here, cultural awareness and adapting your language or humour for international audience. And this is an interesting one for me because I've mainly worked in Asia and South Pacific. And I know that there's a lot of speakers who go to places like Dubai and other areas where culturally they're vastly different to us. And they need to change what they do to deal with that audience's expectations and the organizer's expectations as well. There's obviously certain language you can't use. There's even certain things you can't make jokes about. And I most people I know have not had any problems. They've done a good job and they've gone back multiple times. But it's definitely something that you didn't need to be aware of, I believe.
Yeah. A classic one is Americans are very disinclined to be self-deprecating. The British humour versus the American humour is often talked about even with TV shows. So you have to be a little bit mindful about what you're going to talk about if you're going to tell stories. And also things like even telling case studies or talking about case studies. some people will be horrified at the thought that you might be talking about a real situation that should be perhaps treated as confidential. So you have to sometimes, make it clear that if you are going to tell interesting case studies, that if you're concerned about their view of it, you've got to make sure that they know that you have changed the names or that this is just an example situation. Because I've had an audience in one case a few years ago where they were concerned. Someone was saying, wow, was that for real? It's like, no, that was just an example of, oh, okay, that's cool, thanks. Because, I was really worried about, what someone else was thinking. So, and trigger points, if some audiences, if they're dealing with, for example, you're talking about really highly sensitive topics. I've got one of my authors who speaks about her time in Afghanistan. And so she has to have a bit of a trigger warning at the very beginning of her presentations to actually say, look, we are going to be talking about this. And she's had, occasionally someone will get up and leave, even though she's not going to be talking about overly dramatic situations. But, you have to be mindful that sometimes you've got someone that's going to have PTSD in the room, and whatever you're going to be talking about may trigger them. And that's a really important thing. So reading the room in that way is important.
And that's a big one in that, people are affected by what happens around them, and especially with so many veterans, the different topics can set people off. And so it's well worth having those sort of warnings. But different audience, you talked about the American one and brought back the memory of the first time I went to the States and picked up the phone of the hotel to ring down the concierge to order room service. And they had to tell me to slow down. They couldn't understand a word I was saying.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm speaking English here.
Yes.
But we speak too fast for most Americans. And that was in San Francisco, which is a pretty casual sort of area. But, if you listen to the way I speak, I'll just run all my words together into one sentence. And there's no break in between. That's the way we speak in Australia and New Zealand as well.
Yes.
But you get up in front of an American audience and you speak like this, they're going to miss half the words you're saying.
That is so true. Although having said that, I've got a very good friend who is a professional speaker in North Carolina, and she speaks in a drawl, but it's hyper fast and non-stop speaking. And so every now and then I find myself thinking, where you expect someone's going to be slow or fast, and sometimes it's completely the opposite. But I think it's also mindful that you need to learn, and this is something that we teach our authors, you need to learn how to speak in single sentences. You need to learn how to speak in sound bites and small paragraphs rather than whole pages. Because when you're being interviewed, for example, for a podcast or a radio show or a TV interview, you always need to allow for the interviewer to be able to bring in and ask a question. So one of the really important things that I think we all need to practice, and it's very easy to get out of practice with this, but if you are speaking for an international conference, to speak more slowly in whole sentences and practice that will always stand you in good stead. And it's a really good habit to develop if you are going to also be interviewed. You just
that clarity, enunciation, my mother would always say, make sure you enunciate your words.
Yeah.
It's funny, when voice dictation software first came out, people started to realize they needed to enunciate each word. And it was interesting watching people try and work with it, because those breaks between each word make it easier for voice software. Now, obviously, voice software has got a lot better since then. Yeah. But it's true, if you're going to go and be interviewed on radio, it's worth taking a breath and slowing down. And the same on stage. There's times where you get hyper excited and you speak faster. Well, that's great because it fits with being excited. But then when you're talking about other things, slow down, take a breath and deliver it just a little bit more deliberately.
Yes.
And let the audience soak it in.
A good rule of thumb is to always treat your audience as though there is someone in the audience for whom English is not their first language.
Which is probably pretty common in Australia.
Very common in Australia and New Zealand. Very common in probably every audience. If you just assume that there is someone there who does not have English as their first language, you will remind yourself constantly internally to slow down. And it helps if you have someone who looks like they're obviously not from an English-speaking country, i.e. an Asian country. That helps you to remember while you're on stage. So that's just a little NLP type trigger you can lean into as well.
Exactly. Well, we often go to gigs, and as I said before, sometimes you get the audience that deadpans you, but what about flops and surprises? They're always a lot of fun.
Yeah, it does happen.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get when you walk into a room. And I've seen speakers react differently to different rooms, and it's been rather embarrassing being someone who's been involved in the industry for so long to watch how some people react. So, someone comes into the room and there's only 5 people there that morning for breakfast, and they're like, I can't believe I drove you can see it all over their face. I can't believe I drove all the way here to speak, or I flew here and there's only 5 people in this room. Do you realize how important I am? Like, it's all over them.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a serious mistake to make. I know I've said it before, but it doesn't matter whether there's one person in the room or 1,000 people in the room.
Yeah.
They're there to learn,
Yeah.
and this is your opportunity to help someone.
Yeah.
So you should take it as a great compliment that 5 people cared enough to actually listen to you speak.
Absolutely.
Really, get down off your high horse and start to realize you're just some other person to these people. They don't know you. You're not Michael Gerber. You're not, Anthony Robbins. You're, Brad Houck from the Gold Coast.
You know what I love though, a couple of times I've had that happen, and instead of getting there on stage and, like literally just sitting down at the table with them and saying, okay, let's make this a round table event, or let's make this a boardroom style conversation, rather than thinking you've got to stand there and deliver a presentation. Sometimes you can actually make that work in your favor brilliantly, and actually they appreciate the more feeling of one-on-one time. So
Absolutely.
there are always opportunities to make that better should they come up. But
and I mean, if you walk into a room and there's 10,000 people there, I reckon it's time to go and talk to the organisers and say, am I allowed to run up into the stands?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, sometimes those things are being broadcast, so that's why I say go and check. Don't just go and run into the stands.
Yeah.
But I like to get down off the stage when I'm speaking to an audience and they're doing an exercise, and go out and stand next to people and talk to them and say, well, so what did you write? And what did you write? That sort of thing. Yeah. And I think if I was to walk into a stadium that had 10,000 people in it, not that I've ever had that opportunity yet, I would create great delight in running to the far end of the stadium if I was able to, as long as I was mic'd.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the audience appreciates it's a bit of fun, it's something different.
Yeah.
But you've got to make it work. You can't just go out there and do it for the hell of it, obviously. But work with your audience. Doesn't matter if it's small or big. Appreciate they're there to see you and maybe some other speakers as well. And it may be they've never seen you before, and the impact you make may make you their favourite speaker. And next time they see a conference, they'll go because you're on the card,
Absolutely.
not because Anthony Robbins is on the card.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all done that. Also, I will go to the ends of the earth to see that particular person speak. Everybody else is a bonus. And we've all got our favourites. And if you become someone's favourite, that's even better. A tip that I learnt about, when you're talking about going into the back of the room or having failures or flops and surprises, is that if you've got an audience where you don't necessarily know many people in there, you can actually tee up someone who's going to be at the back of the room and just get them to wave at you if there is a problem with them hearing you, or if there is a problem with them being able to see your slides. So you can just have a spotter in the room. And I love the way the PSA does this. If you've got someone who can then give you an indication of you're running close to time, here's a 5-minute, thing. And you can make sure that one or two people in the room are the ones that you've already schooled up to give you that verbal feedback as you're going through your presentation. That can take a lot of the pressure off you having to figure out whether or not, is it going to be obvious if I look at my watch? Or is it going to be obvious if I'm, I don't want to have to stop and do a sound check in the middle of having just started. You can actually get that feedback and that reassurance already lined up. That can help as well.
Exactly. Yeah, look, getting the 10-minute call is a good one. For me, I like my Logitech controller because it buzzes with 5 minutes to go.
Oh, okay.
And I hate it when I have to use a different controller.
Oh, okay.
I lose track of time. Doesn't matter how many times I've done it,
Yeah.
I've lost track of time. But one thing I did find that I found really good was there was a timer that you can put on an iPad called Liquid Timer.
Oh,
Actually starts with like a full glass of water on your iPad, and it goes down as the time ticks away.
oh, wow.
And so I had that set up, and I had to do a 10-minute speech, which is obviously really, really tight because it was showcased. And we used that for all the speakers. But that timer going down was really good because you could just glance at it and see you had half an iPad left. But look, there's so much we can do, but that pretty well brings us to the end, I reckon.
Yes, I think so.
So thank you for joining Dixie and I on the Expert's Journey today. If you've got any questions or thoughts, please drop us a review or reach out. We'd love to hear from you. If you like this episode, be sure to like, subscribe and share. And if you need help writing a book, see Dixie at indieexpertspublishing.com. And if you want help with AI or online marketing, book a free chat with me at mrwebmarketing.com. We appreciate your time and tuning in with us, and we look forward to having you with us again.
Excellent.